Hi, I'm Seth Grant with Sailrite, and in today's tutorial video, we're going to show you how to make a frown-faced zippered enclosure window in canvas that has both a zipper in the glass and a zipper in the mesh. So you can roll them both up or just have one of them out at one time. Let me show you how it works real fast. So I have Bill here holding the enclosure panel, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how it works. If you unzip it, you just let your glass hang and have just a screen. Or you can unzip the screen as well and have an opening. And if you wanted to, you could unzip the screen all the way and then zip the glass back up so that you had just glass. So basically you have any option, and that is glass, just a screen, opening, or glass and a screen. And one of the great advantages of having a frown zipper instead of a smiley face is that you can just unzip a small portion of it and lets air through right here, but you still have the glass preventing the air from coming through down here. This window also features a shingled window material, which means that the glass comes up over the outside of the canvas, meaning water can't run inside of the enclosure panel. Instead, it runs directly off. We have 3 different videos, each with a different frown window technique, and we're gonna go through them real fast, but you can find the links to the other 2 that you're not watching now in the description below. The first one has a zipper in both the glass and the mesh. So you can unzip the glass and you can unzip the mesh. Or you could just have one of them up at any given time. The second technique is a permanent screen with a zipper in the glass. And the final technique is just a zipper in glass. In this first chapter, we'll be creating a pattern and marking our fabric. So here's a pattern that I've made for my curve for the frowns portion of the zipper. And what I did is I measured 9 inches up, 9 inches over this way, and then I struck a line between those 2 points to complete a triangle. And then I found the center of that triangle right here, and I measured 1.5 inches up from there to create the shape for my arc. And then I just freehand drew this arc in with my white pencil and my white scribble pencil. And then I continued the arc a little bit downward. That way I'm not heading directly into a straight. So the curve will keep going before it hits a straight. That way there's no real turns. And I did the same thing over here. And now I'm going to take a pair of scissors and I'm going to cut on this curve right here on that dotted line. The curve over here doesn't look as nice as the one on this side, so I'm going to trim this a little bit just to make it a little bit more, make it lead into the curve a little bit more. So see, now it's a little bit more round. Okay, so for this window, one of the most important things is that you need to have at least 4 inches of window or of canvas on either side. So the 4 inches in from the outside is the max distance of your window. So if I wanted a 50-inch window, I would have to have a 58-inch piece of canvas in order to have the 4 inches on each side. Okay? And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to mark 4 inches in from our outside edge. So I'm going to use the minimum amount of required canvas. And I'm just going to mark a rectangle around this piece of fabric. So I'll mark here. I'll mark up to this 4-inch mark here at the top, because that's where I'm going to start marking over. And then I'll mark 4 inches across and 4 inches away, 4 inches from the top across, 4 inches from that edge down. I'm using a chalk pencil for this, and if I was doing this on an official panel, like for an enclosure, I would do this line lightly so that I could erase it at these top 2 corners later, because our arch is going to cover most of it, but these corners will be exposed. So I've taken my pattern for my arch, and I want to make it so that it's a gradual curve all the way up to the top, so that there's no sharp turns, and a gradual curve down here on the side. So this is a really nice position. I am going to mark this with my chalk, and I will be covering this mark later, so you don't have to mark it too softly. And just mark all the way over here to this top edge here. And then I'm going to take my marker and mark a little dash here and a little dash here, and I'll have to move this dash to the other side. And then I'll mark a dash here, which is right at where my mark ends. You can see it right there, and a dash there. So now I'm gonna flip this over, and I'm gonna move this mark to the back side. So it's right there. And I will do the same thing with the mark over here. So it's right there. And then I'm gonna take my clear acrylic ruler and I'm gonna measure from that top corner down to the beginning of my arch down here, and it's like exactly 10 inches. And then this way it is 10.5 inches. So I know that I need to mark 10 inches down on this side and 10.5 inches from the center. So 10.5 inches from here is right here. Double check that, yep. And then 10 inches down from that top edge is right down here. And now I can position this arch so that it's in the same position going this way, so that both of the arches are even. The marks are matched up, so now I can mark this. So I'll just mark the same way I did before, all the way down and around this. So this is the top. Now we're gonna come down to the bottom and I'm gonna strike a line 2 inches up, and this will be the canvas for the bottom, because you need canvas at the bottom as well. So 2 inches up from that bottom edge, straight across. Okay, so now I'm gonna start on this side, and I need to mark another arch that is 2 inches away from the arch we just did. So 2 inches outside. I'm gonna go up to here because I know it's straight till there. And I will just mark all the way down. And I don't really need to go past this location right over here because this is for our glass. So right here, I don't really need to go past that. And then I'm going to use my sewing gauge, and I'm going to make dash marks that are 2 inches away from that curved line so that I can match it. And I'll do this all the way across the curve, and then I'll just draw a line right over them. So I'll go around all the way around this curve to the top, 2 inches away from that, do this one, and then come down here to the bottom. And then I'll show you what's next. And then when I'm finished striking these, I'll actually just connect the dotted lines, just like that. And these are covered by binding later on, so you don't have to worry too much about marking heavy, but obviously you don't want to go super, super heavy. I probably went too heavy down here, so I'm going to do everything else with lighter marks. Okay, so now we've struck 2 of the 3 arches. We still have 1 more to do, and the last one is for the location of the zipper. And that line for the location of the zipper is actually more of just a guideline that we'll put on here that'll make it easier to strike the zipper on both the glass and the mesh later on. Okay, so down here at the bottom, we're gonna mark a line that's 3/4 inches down from the bottom edge. This is the bottom edge. Make sure it's the bottom edge. And we'll mark it over here to this line for our rectangle on this side, and over to the rectangle on this side. So mark this all the way across. And this will be for our glass flap that'll go from one side of the panel to the other, that makes it like a shingle and sheds the water off. And so that's 3/4 inches down. Now I need to go 3/8 inches from that edge over and mark down like this. Let me get a little bit more chalk. So 3/8 inches over, mark like this, and then these are connected. So that'll actually be part of the glass that we cut out, and we'll do the same thing over here. 3/8 inch outside, mark over. And I will end up trimming some of this glass off later when I put on my facing. So there'll be a facing strip that covers all of this. But for now, I'm going to cut it at this size. Okay, for our last mark, it's going to be a 1/2 inch in from this outside line. And I'm not going to show you marking with the clear acrylic. I'm just going to show you a little tiny bit of this. It's the same process, 1/2 inch over, and then strike the arch with your chalk pencil. So I'll show you what's next when we're done with this. In this chapter, we'll be cutting the glass and the mesh. Okay, now I have a heat gun, and what I'm going to do is this glass is actually in pretty good shape, but If you notice, if it was really wrinkled, I would use the heat gun and you can heat it up and it flattens out really nicely. So I'm just gonna show you a little example of that. And as you can see, this is already flatter than what it was before. Okay, now I'm gonna take my glass and lay it directly on top of the canvas with the pattern on it. And I'm just gonna take a sandbag here and stick it right here in the center. Okay, scribe ball pencil and outside lines. So I'll trace around my excess down here at the bottom. This is the extra that will become our shingle. And then I'll trace around the entire perimeter of this pattern. So none of the inside lines get traced, just these outside lines. So all the way around that outside arc and back down and around. Earlier, I think I said we're only marking the outside line, but that's not true. We actually have to mark this line too, and this is the line where the zipper comes up against. So I'm gonna mark this line as well around that arch. And obviously the bottom lines are already marked, so it's just the arch I'm marking. Okay, now I'm gonna take my scissors and I'm gonna cut on the external lines only, so the outside lines. Do not cut this inside line. This is for where the zipper is gonna be positioned, just the outside lines. For this project, we're using Strataglass, which is a sheet good. Sheet goods are pressed and polished glass that have exceptional optical clarity, high durability, dimensional stability, and some have a protective scratch and UV-resistant coating, such as Strataglass and OC. Sailrite offers a wide variety of high-quality glass for applications such as this. Okay, so this is the glass we just cut out, and I'm going to line it up with this bottom edge over here. And all I'm going to do is take my scissors and trim around the perimeter of this glass. You could mark it, but you don't have to. I'm not going to, and I put a sandbag on it so it doesn't move around. It's pretty easy to just cut around the perimeter of it. And this is the standard mesh that allows for great breathability, and it's a black, and darker colors are easier to see in and out of. Coming up, we'll be sewing our zippers to both the glass and the mesh. Okay, so now I have my glass laying on top of my canvas, and I'm going to take my zipper, and I'm going to leave, you don't need much extra, just a little over an inch. And I'm going to run this along this inside edge here, and right here where the curve starts, so the curve starting probably about right here, I'm going to mark this zipper on this inside edge, because I'm going to do a shrinking stitch all the way around this curved area so that the zipper has less wrinkles. So I'll just walk this around. And as you can see, the teeth are up. And when I get to the end of the curve, which is probably around here, I'll make sure they're the same on each side. So I'll make sure that the marks are in the same spot. Looks like I stopped this one right on top of that mark we made here. Can you see that mark right there? So I stopped that one right on top of that mark, and that's actually perfect for me. So I'll do this exact same thing on this side. I'll just mark this right on this mark. And then come down to the bottom and cut it off with about 1 extra inch of zipper. Okay, just take some scissors, cut it off about 1 inch extra down there, and we're ready to go do our tacking stitch around the inside edge of the zipper with the teeth up. So we'll show you that next. And now I'm going to repeat that process for the mesh. I won't do it with the mesh. I'll still use the glass, but I can actually just take this other zipper, match them up like this, add that mark in, and then go all the way to the end, cut it, and add the other mark for the second one. Okay, so I'm going to reduce my stitch length for this shrink up stitch on my zipper. So I'll reduce it down to like a 3.5 millimeter. And then I'm going to start on, I'm not changing my tension, I'm going to start on that mark. Okay, my needle's in the left position and my foot is right up against the teeth on the zipper. And I'm just going to sew from the mark that I'm on top of down to the other mark. And I don't really need to do any reversing because I'm going to have another stitch that goes over the top of it. And I'll just sew all the way to that next mark. And as you can see, what this is doing is it's pre-shrinking the zipper. So you can see the little waviness in it, and that is because the zipper is actually shrinking up, and this will go along that inside edge. so that it's all shrunk up and it makes it lay flatter. Once I finish with this zipper, I will do the same thing with the other zipper. I won't show you that, and I'll show you what's next after that. I'm back at the table and I have the zipper, and I'm gonna put the teeth facing down, so the underside of the zipper is facing up towards me, and I'm gonna apply basting tape right up against this edge all the way down the length. Does not have to be exact. And I'll do this on both sides of the zipper, and then I'll show you what's next. Here we are running it down the opposite side of that zipper. So this is the shrunk up side on the inside. I'm gonna remove the basting tape from the outside, so the side that we did not shrink up. And the first thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna match this mark up. See that mark? I'm gonna put it on this line. That's my line for where the zipper goes, but this is the line that's we put on this mark on, so I know that goes right there. So right there, and then I'll just go right on top of that line. I am gonna cover the line all the way down here to the bottom, and then I'm gonna work my way all the way around this arch with the zipper right on top of that line on the glass. And this is pretty easy. So I'm gonna change my stitch length back to a 6mm. So I'm placing some Protect It down on the table. It's it has a really soft side to it, which is great for protecting the glass while you're sewing. I would advise putting something soft down, or else you could scratch the glass while you're sewing it. Okay, and I'm taping this Protect It to the table because I'm gonna be sewing, and when I sew, I'll be moving the fabric towards the back, so that means it's only gonna have a tendency to go towards the back. And I just don't want it to move out from underneath the fabric, so taping it just solves that problem right away. And now I'm gonna start, and I will start down here at the bottom on the outside edge over here with the foot right up against those teeth again, so that the stitch is in the exact same spot it was in the first time. Lower the foot. I'm gonna do some reversing here. So hold my trailers. A little bit of reversing, and then we're just gonna sew around the perimeter, staying right up against those teeth. And I'm gonna hold this part flat where the curve starts, just so I know that I'm right up against those teeth and I can keep my stitch in the same spot. Just keep sewing around the perimeter. This is pretty easy. Okay, now it's time to baste around the inside. So I'm gonna peel up transfer paper, not all of it because I don't want it to stick to the glass ahead of time, but I'm going to lay this down flat all the way around the arch. And when it starts to get to the curve, I might have to put some little wrinkles in there, but the shrink up stitch definitely helps to add those, to shrink the material up so that it's easy to get it flat. You could also do it without the shrink up stitch, but it is more time consuming. And the goal is to keep the teeth as flat as possible. So I'm not worried if there's a little bit of wrinkling out here in that banding, but I want these teeth flat up against the glass. So that's my ultimate goal. So as you can see, I'm pressing directly on the teeth and then pushing towards the outside of the zipper to get it all flat. So this is an example of how awesome that shrink up stitch is. Here's the zipper we shrunk up around the inside edge. And here's a prototype I made of this window. I didn't complete it, but as you can see, look what I had to do to try to shrink the zipper up. And you can see, same size zipper, number 5, there's bubbles in the zipper. But with the shrink up stitch, nothing. It's like absolutely perfect. So that's how awesome the shrink up stitch really is for this type of a window application. Okay, same thing over here. I need to move my needle to the right though, because I want to sew closer to the teeth, just like I did on this side. And then I'm going to line up the inside edge of the foot up against the teeth of the zipper. And I will sew around the arch, just like I did on the other side. Let's hold my trailer, otherwise it's going to pull out. And I'm going to do a little bit of reversing here at the beginning. And then I'll just sew around the perimeter. Okay, now I'm going to take my mesh and I'm going to lay it directly on top of my vinyl window panel so that they're even. And I want to make sure it's even around the perimeter, so I'm actually going to start here at the top. I'd rather have the excess down here since I'm going to trim it off later. And I'm just going to put a few clips on this to hold it in place so that I can base the zipper to the mesh. So clip here and then clip here on this side. So now I'll take the zipper, put basting tape on both sides of the bottom. You notice the teeth are facing down, both sides, and then I'll base this on here. Same process I did with the glass, but I'll show you a little bit of it. Okay, same process as the other one. I'm going to base the outside on first, so not the tack up stitch side or the shrink down stitch, but the outside. And the reason that I clip these right on top of each other is so that I don't have to use the lines on the blue again, because it's hard to see them and you can see the zipper a lot easier. So I know they're the same length, so all I have to do is baste with both the zippers directly on top of one another all the way around the perimeter. And what will happen later is the zipper on the glass will cover the zipper on the mesh, so you'll actually only ever see one zipper on the inside of your enclosure panel. And I will peel it up if I feel like I'm not right on top of the other zipper, because I want them to be as close as possible. Okay, so now I have removed the glass, obviously. This is just the mesh. And I'm going to sew that stitch around the outside of it, just like I did the other time. So needle to the left. And I'll sew right up against these teeth all the way around the perimeter. So exact same process. Do some reversing at the beginning and then some reversing at the end. Very easy. Okay, now I'm working with my mesh and I've started basting it along this inside edge, and I'm going to make sure that I get not only the zipper flat but also the panel, so sometimes the panel will wrinkle a little bit. So I want to make sure they all both go onto one another flat. I'll just do the same thing all the way around. Now we're going to sew this around the inside edge the same way we did on the inside edge of the glass, so we're not going to show this.
In this chapter, we'll be binding the mesh and glass panels together.
So I've got a utility knife with a nice sharp blade on it, and I'm going to be scoring the glass here so that before I sew the assemblies together, that way I can peel it apart once it's sewn together. So at the start, I'm going to score this deeply, so I'm almost going to cut through it. Well, I pretty much will cut all the way through it. So one deep score to start. So that looks like, yeah, there we go, we're through it. And now I'm just going to follow, you can see the middle of the zipper teeth, and I'm just going to follow that as my line all the way around the perimeter. And you do want to take your time with this because obviously this determines how the glass separates. So I'm going to go rather slowly, and I am holding down the glass with my other hand. And using a sandbag in this situation is not a bad idea either, because I really don't want this to move around on me. So just try to keep it still. Okay, so now I have the mesh with the teeth facing up, and I'm going to apply basting tape around this very outside edge. And this edge will be bound to the glass here in a minute. Let me make it so you can see. So I'm just going to stay very close to this edge because obviously I want this basting tape to be covered up by the binding, and go all the way around this frown. Pretty easy. Okay, so I've grabbed my glass here, and I am going to baste the mesh to it, and I have the teeth of the zipper facing down on the glass. And I will put this facing down as well with the teeth, but I'm just going to start peeling off the transfer paper a little at a time because it's going to be hard to get this perfectly basted if I don't. And then I'll just take this to this outside edge and I will baste this on, making sure the bottom edge is flat here or is even here too. And I will just baste this on around the perimeter. And any excess you have on the other side, we can just trim off with scissors if we have extra mesh. So not a big deal. So there's a small lip over here that obviously is hanging off the edge. I'm going to trim this off with scissors because I want it to bind really evenly. So you definitely want to trim it down, but if it's just a tiny bit, it won't matter at all. Okay, so now we're about to bind the outside of our window panel. So I'm going to bind it in zigzag. You could bind it in straight stitch. If you did, you'd want to use a 6mm stitch length. I have it at about a 4mm. And I'm going to move the machine into zigzag. Obviously, my needle's out of the fabric. Needle's in the center position. So move it to a zigzag. And then all I'm gonna do is use the 1-inch binder. So this is a 1-inch binder, 1-inch binding. And I have it set up so that it's really close to that foot. And I'm gonna bind all the way around the perimeter of our frown. And I did remove the protective material from the table because I have the mesh to protect the window. So I removed it. I'll probably have to put it back later for another step. So I created a scrap piece, the exact same configuration I'm going to be sewing, and I sewed my zigzag on here, and I've realized that I want my zigzag to be a little tighter. So instead of 5, I'm going to set it at 4 so that it doesn't fall off the top of the binding. And I did remove the protective material because it doesn't allow the mesh to scoot well, and the mesh is on the bottom, so it's protecting the window. So I'm going to just start right here, do some reversing here at the beginning, and then sew all the way around the perimeter. And I'm paying attention to the exiting point of the binder, so up here at the exiting point, not up here. So right where the fabric goes in is where I'm looking. And I want to get it pressed up in there nicely so that I'm catching both panels. And after you get going a bit, it's a good idea to bury your needle and then check to make sure that your tension looks good, make sure you're catching everything. And I'm just going to keep feeding it in there all the way around the perimeter. Here we're coming into that curve, and this is pretty easy. I'm just rotating it as I go. And every once in a while, I'll bury my needle and just check to make sure our stitch looks good and everything looks great. So we'll keep sewing. So this is the glass. I'm going to have the glass facing down, and I'm going to cut the mesh right on top of where the zipper slider would go, all the way around the perimeter. Very easy step. You don't really need to see hardly any of this. Okay, we've got that cut all the way around the frown, and I'm going to flip this over to the glass side, and I'm going to take the zipper apart. And I do want to find, this is the right side, so I'd want to find the side where I started with my cut, and then all I have to do is peel this away. So all my glass was intact, and now I'm just separating it right on that line I scored earlier. Okay, and now it's separated, and before I put this back, I'm going to put the sliders on my mesh. So I want to have 2 sliders, and they need to start on opposite ends. So this one starts facing, obviously, towards the panel. Get it on there evenly, because the zipper is perfectly even, so I need to make sure it's even. This can take a little bit of effort, but usually it's not too bad. Looks like we got this one on. There we go, perfect. And I'll just pull this one up here to the top in the center. And now I've shifted the panel around, and this is the opposite side. And I'm going to put a second slider on this side. Same way. And then we'll do the glass next. Okay, that one's on. Now we have 2 sliders up there at the middle and the top. We can move on to the glass. Okay, so now we're working with the glass. And I work a lot better if I'm pulling the zipper towards myself, so that I can hold the zipper even on my right hand. I think this is the easiest way to do it. I'm right-handed. And now I have both sides even. And it still doesn't want to get on there for me. So I'll keep working at it until I get it on there. But I should be able to get it on there pretty quickly. There we go. It's on there. It's a little uneven there, but it's only like 1 tooth, so it's not going to be a big deal. And I'm going to push this glass down because it's preventing it from going forward. You can see that glass right there. But once it's down, it won't be a problem anymore. So now the glass is under the zipper. Nope. I caught the other one. There we go. Now they're underneath. Now that they're underneath, it won't happen again, so I don't have to worry about it. In the middle again. Second slider on this end.
In this chapter, we'll be binding the inside edge of our canvas after cutting out the frown.
I'm cutting on this inside line all the way around the outside. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut really close to this bottom edge with a pair of scissors. So now there's a hole for my hot knife. I'm going to move this panel out of the way just in case. This precision cutting foot makes it so you don't need a cutting glass, but I also want to be cautious. I'll push this in here, and then I'm just going to cut on that line around the perimeter. or not the perimeter, sorry. I'll cut on this line around the interior and then show you what is next. So up to the corner. Okay, I'm still set up in the same zigzag stitch that I was in for the outside of the window, but I've changed my thread to a blue that more closely matches my fabric, because now these stitches are going to show on the outside of our window. So I've also changed binding to the exact same color binding as the fabric, and I hot knife the end of this fabric because this is actually going to be the end. So I'm going to put this in here just like this. Actually, I'm going to stick it out a little bit more. And this is the inside of the window, or the window. So this is the bottom that I'm holding up towards you. So I'm going to sew around the frown, around this frown with binding. So I'm going to end up starting down here at this bottom corner of the frown. I'm going to stick this in here and get that binding right up against that bottom edge right there. Okay, and I'm holding it in with this. I'm going to push it in with a screwdriver a little bit here, and then put the foot down. So hold the screwdriver on top, put the foot down so that it's fed in there nicely. And I'll do some reversing to get down to that bottom edge. So I'm not really starting the binder until I get to this upper point. So I'm putting this in by hand almost. Okay, hold the trailer, and I'm going to do stitch forward, and then reverse down to the bottom of that, and then start going forward again. Okay, and then I'm just feeding it in just like I did the window and binding around this. And you could do this in a straight stitch as well. I'm using a zigzag because I think it looks better and it catches more of the binding. And I'm going to check my stitch. Stitch looks great. Came down probably a little bit shorter than I would have hoped. I probably should have started a little farther down there, but it should be covered by our facing, so I'm not going to worry about it. Okay, so I'm coming up to the end here, and I want to have the binding finished right on that edge, so I can actually just match these up. So I'm going to match up these two edges, so you see that? I want the binding to end right there too. Okay, so I'm just going to cut it right there where those two panels meet. And you could hot knife that edge as well, and then I'm just going to take this and finish feeding it into the binder. Make sure you don't sew through any of this fabric underneath. Okay, just feed it all the way through. I'm getting caught on the binder on the underside. Then look for the end. When you see the end, that's the stopping point, and then do some reversing there. So we're back at the table. I have the mesh side facing up towards me, and I'm going to put basting tape right in the center of that binding, all the way around the frown, not at the bottom edge. And then I will take the Sailrite canvas pattern ruler to make sure it sticks down well, because we know that acrylic fabrics resist glues, stains, etc. So we want to stick it down well. I'll just do this all the way around the frown and then show you what's next. Okay, so I have the canvas back on the table with the marked side facing up towards me. And I'm going to peel off this transfer paper, if I can get it started, which I cannot. There we go. Make sure it's stuck down there at the beginning as best I can. Peel this off. And as you can see, it already doesn't want to stick to it. And I'm going to take this and I'm going to start basting this on. I'm not going to peel all the transfer paper off. I'm going to come over here to this side. I'm going to start basting this on. This is the bottom of the glass right here, and I want to line that up on top of our previous mark and start basting it on right there on top of that line, all the way around the outside. Peeling up the transfer paper as I go. Just keep getting it basted on there. And I'm moving the canvas around underneath, not the panel obviously is very stiff, but the canvas can be moved around, and then I'll turn it over and make sure it looks nice and flat before I take it to the machine. So you can see canvas needs to come over just a little bit. It doesn't have to be absolutely perfect. We have it on there now, and now I'm going to take the canvas pattern ruler again and put it on there, or press it down as tight as I can, because I do not want this to move. Okay, so now I'm gonna turn it over and look at it real fast. And what I wanna make sure is I wanna make sure that I'm not seeing the zipper underneath. I wanna make sure it looks pretty flat, which it does. It might need a little bit of adjustment over here because you can see it's sitting proudly a little bit, but I'll do that and then I'll show you what we do here down at the bottom edge next. So I'm just gonna adjust it over here a little bit. So I just pulled up the binding a little bit, stuck it back down, and now I'll check to see if it's flatter, and it definitely looks like that did help. So now I'm gonna take my scissors and I'm gonna cut into the glass up into the inside edge of my canvas. You can see the canvas there on the bottom, and I'll cut right straight across to that, no deeper than the end of that binding right there. Just like that. And I'll do the exact same thing with the mesh as well, so that it goes to the other side, just like that. And now what it's gonna happen is I'm gonna take this and I'm gonna push this through to the underside. And what that does is it creates a shingle so that when it's in the weather, the water is going to run off of it. Let me do this side real fast and then I'll flip it over and show you the other side. There are instances where you might have glass that comes down too low and you have to cut the glass up a little bit. That is not a big deal. So I'm cutting upwards just a little bit, and then I'll cut over to the edge of that binding right there. Okay, and then I'll feed this part to the underside as well. And there you have it. That's what it looks like. So as you can see, now that I have it flipped over, I've created a shingle. So this is the outside of the window, and when the water comes down, instead of going to the inside of the window, down here at where the fabric is, it'll flow to the outside. So basically, water cannot go into this bottom edge. Okay? And now we're ready to take this to the machine, and we're gonna sew around this binding, just the binding, not the bottom edge yet, with our blue thread that matches the fabric, because this stitch is going to be seen on the outside. Okay, I am back into a straight stitch with a 6 millimeter stitch length. Needle is in the center position, and I'm going to sew. You don't have to worry about putting down protective material because the mesh is on the outside. And I'm going to sew right on top of this binding, centered, where the glass starts. So right there, and I will do reversing here. Okay, then I'll just sew right on top of that binding around the perimeter. And I'm just keeping the foot like centered on the binding. Want to make sure the panels are still attached together, so if they come unattached at any point, make sure you adjust them. And you will notice that this is blue thread on the inside, but for me, the more important side is the outside. So I wanted to have the blue thread on the outside of the material where people are going to see most often. And you also should check your tension on the bottom side after you've started a short bit. Okay? So we're going to keep sewing around the perimeter. I want to make sure I pay attention to over here. Obviously, it came unstuck already, and I'll re-stick it down as I go. But this can get caught under the table and really screw up your sewing. So make sure you're paying attention to how your panel is set up. So I know this is still basted. I can still tell it's basted, and I'll just keep sewing. Now I'm getting to the point where I need to make sure this is above the table. It's pretty easy. You just have to make sure that you get the panel in the right position.
In this final chapter, we'll be finishing the bottom edge of the glass.
Now we're ready to put our finishing touches on our window, which is this bottom edge right here. And what I'm going to do first is I'm going to trim this because I'm going to use a 1-inch binding coming across here, just like this. And I obviously have too much glass. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to trim this probably in half. So it's probably like 1/4 of an inch from the bottom of the fabric all the way across. Okay, so now I'm going to be able to put this on so that it covers this binding, and I've just hot knifed this end right here. And it's going to go all the way across here and be basted on like this. But before I do that, I'm going to turn this over and work on getting this side ready for its finishing as well. So I'm going to take my scissors and I'm going to trim these zippers so that they're flush and the binding, so that they're all flush with the bottom of the glass. And we're going to cover the these with the binding as well. I'm going to leave these actually like so that they come down here to almost where the bottom of I can feel the glass underneath the ridge. I'm going to leave these so they come down to that location, and I might have to cut them later, but for now, that's where I'm going to trim them to. This side looks like it's already pretty close. Obviously, I'll trim this down a little bit, and I'll trim these down just a slight bit as well. And now we're ready for binding on this side as well. And this will be black binding on this side, and it'll be the royal blue on the other side. So let's start by taking our binding. This is our royal blue. Can you stop for a second? I have the top side facing up here on the table, and what I'm going to do before I put any of my binding on is I'm going to put basting tape on the edge of this canvas all the way across. That way it doesn't move around when I'm applying the binding. So all the way across, and then I'll remove the transfer paper and I'll baste it so that the canvas is perfectly straight. And I'll show you that in a second here. Okay, I'll peel up this transfer paper. And I'm not going to peel it up all the way across. I probably should have used the canvas patterning ruler here, but I should be okay. And I'm going to try to get this so that it looks nice and straight, and then start basting it down. And it might not be perfectly straight as far as the fabric goes, because I'm human and I probably didn't cut the fabric perfectly straight, or the glass, but I want to make sure it looks as good as possible.
I think you want to say I want it to be as flat as possible, not straight.
Now I have my binding, and I'm going to place one row of basting tape on one of the outside edges, all the way across a length of binding that is extra long. CLRite canvas patterning ruler to make sure it sticks in place. Okay, this end is already hot knifed, so this end I'm going to start with it, and I'm going to baste this down so that it covers, it goes just over the end of this binding right here. And I want to get it straight so that it's nice and straight all the way across. So I'm going to pay close attention to how it's basting down, because I'm going to have to put another piece of binding on the other side to finish this edge. So just baste it nice and straight all the way across to the other end. And then we'll use a hot knife to cut that end and finish it. Okay, I'm going to take my scissors first, come over here to this end and cut it so that it's right even with this binding. So I want it to be vertically even right there. And then I'll take my hot knife and I will touch the end of this binding with the hot knife. Just like that. And I can see that this glass is coming out a little bit far. No problem at all. I'll just trim the glass and the mesh. Now it is underneath that binding. And this side is now ready, and we can go work on the inside of the window. So we'll flip this over. Okay, so originally I was going to use black binding down here at the bottom on this side, but then I was looking at it and I'm like, I'm going to have blue thread showing through, so I might as well make it blend as best as possible, and you really won't even notice that this is blue. So this is what I'm going to use for this side as well. And I think I'm going to put basting tape on both sides of the binding for this one, since it has to stick on top of the zipper and on the downside as well. So both sides of the zipper right up against the outside edge. Okay, first thing I'm going to do is touch this end with a hot knife, which is the end I'm going to start with. And then I'll peel off, I've used the canvas patterning ruler to make sure this sticks down well, and I'll peel off just a little bit of each side of this at a time so that I can work my way down to the other end slowly and not have it stick to everything it touches. Get that transfer paper off, there we go. And I'm just going to start basting right here at the end of our binding, making sure that I'm covering all of this, but I also need to make sure I'm paying attention to where the next binding starts underneath, because we're going to sew through both at the same time. So right there is where they're all even. And I'm going to be looking through the glass and mesh, and I can see the binding that I put on the other side, and I want to put this exactly on the top of it. So I'm being very careful to get them matched up perfectly all the way across. And then I'll do the same thing on the other end over here that I did on the starting end and on the ending end of the last one. I'll cut the binding, touch it with a hot knife, and baste it down. Okay, one more thing. I came to the realization that my zipper is a little bit too long. I can feel it about 3/4 of the way through this, which means it's going to make it's really hard to do the outside stitch. So I'm going to trim off more of the zippers. So about that much more, and I'll do the same thing on the other side as well. Just want to make sure that I have enough that I hit it with this stitch on the top side. Okay, and we'll do the same thing at the other end. So the glass is facing up, which means this is the inside of the window. And I'm going to do a tacking stitch over my zippers before I even start sewing the rest of the panel. And the reason I'm doing that is because this is the hardest spot to sew. So you might as well get the zippers tacked down before you do the rest. That way you can guarantee the rest of it looks really good. I have my needle in the left position. I'm sewing a straight stitch, and I'm using the outside edge of the inside foot as my guide. And I'm just gonna hold my trailer, and I'm gonna sew in forward and reverse back and forth across this. And I'm gonna do this slowly since I'm sewing through the zipper, making sure I don't deflect a needle. So there's one pass. Go to the end of that zipper, and then sew back. And then I'll do one more pass here, and then I'll go on to the other zipper, the other end of the zipper. Oops. And there we go. That's perfect right there. Remember, you can always use the balance wheel to get it through if you feel like it's stuck, rather than forcing it with power. There we go. That's tacked down, and we'll do the other side in the exact same way. Double-sided tape is your friend in this situation, so if you feel like something's not sticking down the way you want, you can always take the double-sided tape and run another line of double-sided tape across to make sure everything stays in place. So don't be afraid to use it. I'm just doing this on the other side of the binding that we only put one on earlier, so it all stays in place. So now we're going to sew a zigzag stitch around the inside or on this binding. So I'm going to change my stitch length to about a 4mm stitch length, and then I'm going to change the distance of the zigzag to about a 4 as well. And what I'm doing is, the reason I'm sewing in a zigzag is because I want to guarantee that I hit the bottom of this panel. So if I do a zigzag, I'm guaranteeing it, and it'll look great even if it is not perfect. Okay, and I'm going to start over here on one of these ends. I'm going to start over here on one of these ends, and I'm going to use the inside edge of this center foot as my guide for this. So I'll do some reversing here at the beginning, and this is the inside of the window. So this is not sewing to the outside yet, but I'm going to do some reversing here, and then I'm just going to use that as a guide and sew all the way across the panel. And then I'll do a second row on the top side of the binding. And when you get a little ways in, you're going to want to stop with your needle buried. So this is probably far enough. I'll bury my needle, and then I'm going to look underneath. So as you can see there, we're hitting the binding nicely. And you can also do this in straight stitch. You just need to be careful about making sure you're hitting the bottom side at the same time. Okay, so I'm not going to even turn when I come up here to the end. I'm just going to sew up to the end and do some reversing, and then I'll reverse also when I sew the other end as well. So reversing here, make sure you're coming all the way out to the end of the binding, and there you go. Okay, now I'll pull it back to the other end again, and I will just start on this top side and do the exact same thing. So I'll put it down, and I'm going to go slow with this because I'm sewing over the binding, I'm sewing over the zipper. So you want to make sure you're taking your time, don't rush it. So I'll just start sewing here, do a little bit of reversing. Okay, and then I'll just take this slow. I'm not going to rush it at all. I want to make sure everything looks good. Then just sew all the way across to the other end and do some reversing there as well. So we just finished sewing it. Here's what it looks like on the front side. As you can see, the zigzag stitches all the way across. And I would recommend zigzag for this bottom edge here, but you could do straight stitch. You just need to be very careful to make sure that you hit both ends or edges of the binding on each side. And then let's show you what it looks like on the inside over here. Got to cut some trailers down there still, but looks really nice on the inside as well. And I'll show you how it works here in a second. So this is the inside of the window. So to open it up, all you got to do is zip it both directions, and you can open it up as little or as much as you want. So if you want to only roll it down partially, you can, or you can roll it down all the way. So if I rolled it down all the way and I wanted to also unzip the screen, I can unzip the screen here. And as you can see, I can roll the screen to the inside or to the outside. If I roll the screen to the outside, so say I was rolling it to the outside, I can actually take the main panel and zip it back up again so that you just have a vinyl window just like that. And I would obviously have this rolled up more neatly at the bottom. So what makes this process great is that it can function as just a screen, just a window, or a window and a screen. And that's all zip with zippers, so very nice.
Our frown face window is now complete. For a list of the materials and tools we used in this project, check out the description below. Be sure to subscribe and hit the bell to be notified when new videos become available. From all of us here at Sailrite, thanks for watching.